Hi, my name's Rebecca and I'm editor at Co-op News. We are living in extraordinary times where people, businesses and communities are cooperating in extraordinary ways. Over the next few weeks, alongside our regular written content, Co-op News is going to be bringing you some videos telling and sharing some of these extraordinary stories. With me today is my colleague Miles Hadfield, who is the Co-op News digital editor. So Miles, we've received a deluge of stories over the last couple of weeks from cooperative businesses right around the world, and in different sectors too, from food and agriculture right through to retail and finance and politics. So today we're going to talk a little bit about food and retail. As a starting point, it's been interesting to see the emergence or re-emergence of hyperlocal mutual aid, with people turning to cooperation almost as a natural response to the coronavirus crisis.
It seemed to appear sort of spontaneously around the country. It was almost like the idea of travel around by osmosis, and I suppose social media's helped that, and it's happened at a really micro level. It's happened at the building I live in, which is a block of flats, and they just set their own up on Facebook. So it's happening on that sort of level and on street level and neighborhood level. And it's like, you know, social media is maybe, people talk about the downsides of it, but it's instilled that sort of connectiveness, which, you know, is, you know, actually sort of in a way quite close to co-op ideas, and a lot of co-ops have naturally jumped on the ball on this one. We've written a lot about the Bevy, the pub in Brighton, the community pub, and you know, they were right on it really in repurposing what they were doing, because they had to shut the doors, and they shut the doors before they were told to do so, and they've got their own little community garden, and their locals can just turn up, pick up a box and take a box away, so they're supplying food that way. And they've, you know, got a network of volunteers delivering boxes of food to people who need it. So, you know, that is an example of mutual aid and neighbourhood organisation, and also of a co-op, you know, and co-ops in this are a natural fit.
So talking of a good fit, I know you've been writing a little bit about Corporation Town, the network of self-organised food co-ops.
Yeah, they've, I mean, they sort of starting up over the last, you know, few months. So it's almost like they arrived to order when this crisis happened. It's worth remembering that a lot of communities have already been in crisis. You know, a lot of people who are socially isolated, you know, are already effectively in lockdown. A lot of people where, you know, transport links aren't so good, or have, different abilities. You know, this is, we're now living their lives. You know, I know a lot of people with disabilities who are saying, "Welcome to my world." Things like Corporation Town were already springing up in response to that crisis, and now there's a bigger crisis. And yeah, they started up in Kentish Town, and they're a local food distribution group network, and they're looking to replicate that model in communities all over the UK. There's one up and running in Birmingham now. Radical Roots has been involved in it. They've been, you know, really very effectively using social media, especially Facebook. I think their main point of contact is their Facebook group to set themselves up. And you know, what they're doing is basically what mutual aid groups that have sprung up all over the country are now trying to do. So, you know, they were in there first with the idea, and they have been working with mutual aid groups in their areas. So, you know, that's an example really of how cooperative ideas are what build resilience into communities, because when a crisis happens, you've got this network.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about co-op retailers now. Most people have heard of the co-op or the co-op group, but they're one of around 18 independent co-op retail societies in the UK, and that includes others like Mid Counties in Central England, Scott Mid, East of England, Heart of England, Southern, Lincolnshire, Chelmsford, Star, Tamworth, Radstock. And then there's the small ones as well, like Clydebank, and I'm going to have to read these ones out. I've got Clydebank, Seaton Valley, Allendale, Coniston, Hawkshead and District, Langdale and Neighbourhood, and Gromont Cooperative Society too. So Mars, you've been doing a daily roundup for Co-op News, and that includes some of the retail stories. So what are some of the stories that have really stood out for you?
I mean, first, let's just say the actual volume of activity and the pace of activity has been very, very impressive. You know, just this has been a situation that seems to have caught us on the whole country on the hop, or the whole world on the hop, and co-ops have been reacting to it the same way as the rest of us, and they seem to have done a pretty good job of it. They were, in bringing in the social distancing really quickly, rearranging the staffing, the incredible initiative from the co-op group and the other retailers in hiring staff so quickly. I think some of the other initiatives we've seen, I think we've seen co-ops, reallocating some like discounts and bonuses to help their own staff. Most of them have started closing the stores earlier so they can restock the shelves, but also to give the staff a rest. When you go into a retail store, not just co-ops, any retail store, the staff do look quite tired and under pressure. It's very important, I think, to remember just how much pressure they're under. I complain about working in lockdown and not going out of the house, but this is so much easier than being on the front line and exposing yourself to this thing day in, day out. Also, I think the retail co-ops have been very apt at using social media to connect with people. What we saw, for instance, from co-op retailers joining in the clap for NHS workers. There were videos all over Twitter and Facebook of them doing that, and that was very inspiring. It sort of shows the response of co-ops and the spirit of their staff, and also I think it's a sign that this sort of spirit of cooperation and collaboration is now a national thing. This is retail workers in co-ops clapping for state sector workers in the health sector, and so this is, the spirit of cooperation and collaboration is now what is happening across the country. We've got to have different sectors working together. The way that co-ops have worked very hard with their suppliers to ensure that food still keeps coming through, so that the co-ops like Mid Counties or East of England or the co-op group that have strong links with their local sources have really worked well with their local sources and have built up new ones. There was the story last week of Mid Counties doing a deal with a butchers in Oxfordshire that had lost all its trade because it supplied the hospitality sector. So Mid Counties has gone in and done a deal with them, which keeps that business afloat and also helps Mid Counties prop up its supply chains. So it's not just cooperation within co-ops. This is cooperation everywhere, and hopefully it'll just teach the rest of the country about cooperation a bit.
I guess another question is that a lot of the responses being made by co-ops are ones that are being made by retailers more generally. Have you come across any instances of co-ops doing things differently, or any difference they are making by virtue of being co-ops?
I think one thing that I've noticed about the co-ops is they're quite hyper-local and they're convenience store based. So in a sense, you go to your little convenience store, it's actually a little bit easy now because you're not stood outside an Asda or a Sainsbury's queuing 2 meters apart for the best part of an hour to get through the door. It's because it's a smaller scale, not quite as busy. And I know someone who went to I can't go to stores because my partner has immune issues, but a friend of mine popped into one, and he said the little co-op group store he went to, he waited 5 minutes, and there was because it was just faster footfall, faster flow, and it's just so in a way co-ops have a certain advantage there in that they're hyper local and can respond quite quickly on that level.
Okay, so what about the governance issue? Co-ops are owned by their members, and a lot of things are happening very quickly, rightly very quickly right now, but without leaving a lot of time for scrutiny.
They have this network of member pioneers, for instance, in the co-op group, and the others also have their community networks, which they seem to be repurposing. And so I have seen people ask on the Facebook members group for co-op members what the governance and what sort of scrutiny is there of that, and what level involvement is there with the members council. So that's something that we're going to look at, and I'm sure other people are looking at. And there are governance questions across the entire co-op movement because we're just coming into AGM season. So it's the question of what do you do with your AGMs? What do you can do it online, but looking at the demographic profile of things like the Co-op group, you know, do all your members have the kit to do that? And even if they have the kit, are they as comfortable using, you know, this kind of remote working as we are? I mean, we're not that comfortable with it ourselves, and you know, it's getting used to a very new way of doing things, and that might not be so easy for older members. So there's all sorts of governance issues around that of providing access to members in this new, you know, digital world that we've all been, you know, forced to switch to very abruptly. So there's, you know, there's all kinds of issues there.
I know Co-ops UK have put together some great advice on governance issues and other issues, and we'll include some links to that and the other stories mentioned in this video in the description below. But talking of new ways of working, a lot of co-ops have been repurposing themselves, haven't they? As they get involved in their communities. I know, for example, October Books started selling groceries online through their website. Who else have you come across doing that, Miles?
Drive Taxis in Cardiff, who you know, won a lot of plaudits really. Drive Taxis has been offering a lot of services in terms of helping distribute food to people who need it, free shopping trips for the elderly, discounts for key workers, you know, things like that. So they've, you know, and they were right off the ball. They were, when I started looking on social media for the Co-op response, they were one of the first ones in there. I think it's probably a mixture of, you know, pragmatism and also service, in that, you know, these Co-ops need to branch out. They've, you know, potentially, you know, there are problems if you lose so much of your business. So if you're providing an alternative line of business, you know, you're protecting yourself as well as providing an essential service. I mean, during that first couple of weeks when it was very, very hard to access any supplies, something like October Books would have been a lifeline to someone.
I think the COVID-19 pandemic is a real test of how solid national infrastructure is, and co-ops are obviously a big part of that infrastructure. How do you think they're going to respond in future to issues like global trade or food provenance, or the health risks associated with different global farming models, or even fair trade?
It's kind of quite early to go into the whole epidemiology of COVID-19. People haven't quite come up with a definitive answer of how it started, but, you know, people have looked at, you know, food sourcing practices, whether it's wet markets or whether it's, you know, big industrialized poultry farming with these factory farms with these, you know, chicken flus just ripping through them. And the fact that if one of those crosses over to the human population, it could be an awful lot worse than COVID-19. So I think that does put issues of food provenance and food ethics and food safety right at the forefront. And the co-op model, which, you know, potentially extends right through the supply chain. It's obviously one of the selling points of co-ops for farmers is that it builds resilience and gives them control over the supply chain. Co-ops have been very, very active in things like local food sourcing and farm to fork initiatives. You know, the group in mid-counties and east of England and others, ScotMid, have all been very proactive on that already. There's quite a growing movement of community gardens and neighbourhood veg growing schemes in the UK and in other countries. Quite a lot have come up through the Cleveland model in America. So possibly you could end up with the whole co-op ecosystem of food production, from, you know, your local vegetable patch to your local store or your local food co-op or your local mutual aid scheme. Maybe it's time for co-ops to look at getting back into farming. I don't know. That's, you know, the co-op group used to have a network of farms.
And of course, Radstock Co-op still does, doesn't it? And now it's got its dairy farm that supplies co-op stores throughout the UK.
Radstock still does, yeah. And so maybe maybe that will be a way to go. I don't know. Maybe that idea would not be practical. It's very glib to sit here and say that that's the solution, but it is something that the country is thinking about, is where does our food come from?